Most crime scenes are violent ruptures, moments of chaos that disrupt the fabric of reality. But the unsolved mystery of Clara Beaumont is different. Her crime scene is a silent, unbroken moment of time, perfectly preserved for 65 years. In the sleepy coastal town of Port Haven, Connecticut, stands the sprawling, Gothic Beaumont Estate. It has been sealed since 1957, locked by the courts, untouched by the world, a museum of a single, agonizing day. To step inside the house is to step not just into the past, but into a freeze frame of a life violently interrupted. On the dining room table, a newspaper is dated October 23, 1957. On the stove, a pot holds dried, shriveled potatoes cooked the night she vanished. Dust lays thick over everything, a fine, suffocating shroud. But beneath the dust, a stack of records waits by the turntable, a half-filled gin glass sits by the armchair, and a floral dress hangs, waiting to be worn. Clara Beaumont didn't just disappear. She was erased from a life she was clearly prepared to leave. The house is a mausoleum to an ending that never got to happen. It whispers one terrifying question to anyone brave enough to enter. If she was planning to run away, why did she leave the future behind? The heart of the tragedy lay in the suffocating perfection of the life Clara Beaumont was expected to lead. The victim, Clara Beaumont, was 38 years old and possessed a brittle, striking elegance. She was known to the town as the beautiful wife of a shipping magnate, a woman who had everything. But the house itself told a darker story. She was meticulously organized, known for her private journal entries and her quiet, unshakable desire for freedom. On the desk, Detective Sergeant Elias Vance, who reopened the cold case decades later, found a handwritten, unmailed letter addressed to a friend in New York, detailing her plans to leave her marriage the week after her disappearance. To Vance, this proved one thing. Clara was not depressed, she was determined. The prime suspect, then and now, was her husband, Arthur Beaumont. At 52, Arthur was cold, controlling, and heir to an immense shipping fortune. He was a man accustomed to having his orders followed instantly, a psychological tyrant who saw his wife as a prized, beautiful possession. When questioned in 1957, Arthur was unervingly calm. He claimed Clara packed a small suitcase, announced she was leaving him for good, and simply drove away. He stated he didn't stop her. His story, clean and emotionally void, was the version the 1957 police chose to believe, partially out of deference to his wealth and standing. The original authority figure was Detective Lieutenant Frank Sterling, a man whose investigation was defined by his own limitations. Sterling saw a wealthy wife, a controlling husband, and a lack of forced entry. He dismissed the case instantly as desertion by the distraught, unable or unwilling to consider that a man of Arthur Beaumont's standing might commit murder. Sterling's failure was the reason the house remained sealed. He never treated it as a true crime scene, preserving only the illusion of a runaway. The vital witness was Mabel Croft, the family's longtime cook and maid. Mabel was the last confirmed person to see Clara alive. She testified in 1957 that she saw Clara carrying a small, worn leather suitcase down the back steps that evening. Mabel's testimony, seemingly supporting Arthur's claim of abandonment, was the final nail in the coffin for the initial investigation. But Mabel died years later, carrying a secret guilt that Detective Vance would eventually uncover in her personal papers. For 4 decades, the Beaumont files sat dormant, the official conclusion being that Clara had liquidated assets and vanished into the anonymity of New York City. The house remained the haunting centerpiece of Port Haven, the place where the past was trapped. In 2002, Detective Sergeant Elias Vance, a young detective obsessed with the concept of silent crime scenes, inherited the file. Vance looked at the crime through a modern lens, instantly recognizing the immense failure of the 1957 investigation. He saw the misogynistic bias that led Sterling to believe the wealthy, controlled husband over the signs of a meticulously planned escape. Vance focused entirely on the house. He petitioned the court to open the estate, arguing that the frozen environment was not a museum of abandonment, but a perfectly preserved crime scene. The conflict was immediate and dual-layered. First, Vance fought the bureaucratic resistance of the Port Haven archives. The original police had failed to dust for prints in key areas, and the technology to analyze the few blood samples found, dismissed as kitchen spills, didn't exist in the 50s. Second, Vance clashed with Arthur Beaumont's legal team, who fought tooth and nail to keep the house sealed, arguing the detective was harassing an elderly, grieving widower. Vance's escalation began when he realized the most compelling piece of evidence was the half-eaten dinner found still sitting on the sideboard. Roast chicken and those shriveled potatoes. If Clara was leaving, packed and ready for a dramatic escape, why did she stop to prepare a full, time-consuming meal? Vance brought in forensic food specialists who determined the meal had been prepared sometime between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m., the exact window Arthur claimed she was packing to leave. Furthermore, the gin glass was analyzed and found to contain a high concentration of barbiturates, Clara's prescription anxiety medication, but the dosage was far higher than her normal therapeutic dose. This discovery shattered the runaway theory. Clara hadn't packed to leave. She had been preparing to start a new life and had been drugged while making dinner. Vance now knew that Mabel Croft's testimony, the one detail that cleared Arthur, had to be the key to the killer's misdirection. He located Mabel's distant surviving niece and found a collection of Mabel's personal letters. In a hurried, decades-old correspondence, Mabel had written a friend, describing the police interview. "Mr. Arthur told me exactly what to say about the suitcase. He promised me a lifetime pension if I just told him she left. I never saw her leave. I only saw his shadow." The escalation was complete. The house had been frozen not in the moment Clara left, but in the moment Arthur made her disappear, and the killer had planted the witness and the story himself. The new investigation shifted entirely from where did she go to what happened in the kitchen. Detective Vance returned to the preserved kitchen, the final location where Clara was alive and cooking. He ignored the prominent clues, the dinner, the gin glass, and focused on the mundane. He brought in specialists to examine the walls, the flooring, and the cabinets with modern luminol and UV lighting. The twist was revealed not in a dramatic blood spray, but in a subtle, almost microscopic detail that the 1957 police could never have noticed. On the underside of a lower kitchen cabinet, right above the heavy cast-iron skillet rack, Vance's team found two distinct, nearly invisible streaks: a microscopic flake of navy blue enamel paint and a sliver of dried, 65-year-old human tissue. The navy blue paint was immediately identified. It was the exact custom color used only on the exterior of the Beaumont family sailing yacht, the Sea, which Arthur had been meticulously maintaining that summer. The significance was shattering. Arthur had claimed he was in a study all evening, calmly reading. But the evidence proved that Arthur was in the kitchen, involved in a physical struggle that was violent enough to scrape the paint from his hands or clothes onto the cabinet as he reached for or moved something heavy, like the skillet. The truth materialized instantly for Vance. Arthur hadn't let Clara leave. He had caught her finishing her letter, confronted her while she was cooking, and, in a swift moment of proprietary rage, he killed her right there in the kitchen, either by smothering her after the barbiturates took effect or by a sudden, violent blow with a heavy object like the iron skillet. He then had to dispose of the body before the maid returned in the morning. The suitcase story was a lie designed to confuse the timeline, and the untouched house was Arthur's guarantee that no one would ever suspect the domesticity of the kitchen. The house where time stopped was not a monument to her abandonment, but a perfectly maintained alibi for her killer. Detective Vance knew he had the motive, Clara's planned departure, the timeline, the drug dinner, and the physical location of the struggle, the kitchen cabinet paint smudge. All that was missing was the body. Vance located Arthur Beaumont, now frail, 85, and living in a sterile Florida retirement community. Vance flew down to confront the man who had lived 50 years in the clear, protected by his privilege and the passage of time. Vance presented his findings not as theory, but as fact, using the house itself as the chief witness. Mr. Beaumont, you claimed she left with a suitcase, but she was drugged and she was killed in the kitchen. We found the evidence that proves it. The house is a witness, sir, and it still hasn't moved. Arthur remained silent, his eyes glazed with the shock of being dragged back to that October night. Vance leaned in, his voice low and firm. Where is she, Arthur? The body had to be moved before dawn. The sea, which was docked that night. You were seen cleaning it thoroughly with solvents the next morning. You said you never went to the back pantry, but your boat paint is on the cabinet above the skillet rack. The climax was less a confession and more a psychological collapse. Arthur Beaumont, faced not with circumstantial speculation, but with the concrete, unmoving evidence of his own kitchen cabinet, finally broke. She was leaving me, Arthur whispered, his voice rattling. I found the letter. She was taking half the money. She was going to ruin me. He admitted to confronting her, to the struggle, and to finally suffocating her after the drugs weakened her resistance. As for the body, Arthur revealed his grim secret. He used his yacht to transport her in the dead of night. He had tied her body to the heavy, old ship's anchor, sailed 4 miles out to a notoriously deep section of Sound, and dropped her overboard. The anchor and the body would have sunk far beyond the reach of any reasonable search crew in 1957. The resolution was both complete and frustratingly incomplete. Arthur Beaumont was arrested and charged with first-degree murder based on the strength of the new forensic evidence and his confession. But the ocean, Arthur's final, silent accomplice, held Clara's body fast. She was finally accounted for, but she would never be brought home. The house where time stopped had finally delivered justice, but the victim remained lost to the cold, deep water. The Beaumont Estate remained sealed, now a monument not to a runaway, but to a hidden domestic homicide. Arthur Beaumont died in prison 2 years after his arrest, carrying the secret of the precise coordinates of Clara's resting place to his grave. The case of Clara Beaumont reminds us that the most dangerous weapon in any unsolved crime is not the gun or the knife, but the assumption of the investigator. Because of prejudice and privilege, a domestic murder was dismissed as a social embarrassment, granting a killer 5 decades of freedom. The house where time stopped serves as a chilling reminder. Time does not heal all wounds, and it certainly doesn't erase all crimes. It merely preserves the truth, waiting for the right person with the right tools to finally look past the polished illusion and see the blood on the clean, white cabinet. The only witness to Clara's final moments was the kitchen, and it kept the killer's secret perfectly until the very end. This was Trace Crime Files. Subscribe for more stories where truth is stranger than fiction, and justice is never as simple as it seems.